Okay, so today we're going to be doing my August wrap-up, all the books that I read in the month of August, and how I felt about them, and how I rated them. But before we do all that, a shout out to today's sponsor, Squarespace. From websites to online stores to marketing tools to analytics, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform that helps you to build your website and grow your business, but we'll talk more about them at the end of the video. And before I get into the list of all the things I read and how I felt about them, an announcement for the buddy reads. If you don't know, we do buddy reads every single month. Over on my Discord servers, I have a Patreon where we buddy read 2 books a month, and then all the proceeds for that Patreon go towards our adoption, helping us fund our adoption. And then if you can't or don't want to donate through Patreon, I also have a public server that you can join where we do 1 buddy read a month or just chat about everything and anything. Both of those are linked down in the description if you want to join. This month we have 4 buddy reads because I messed up the Patreon poll. So Oathbringer, over on my Patreon, we have been buddy reading we've been buddy reading Stormlight in anticipation for book 4 coming out. It's now time for Oathbringer, so we'll be buddy reading that over there. And because I forgot that it was Oathbringer month, I selected 2 winners for the poll. And then I didn't want to take back what I selected, so we're actually buddy reading 3 books over on Patreon this month. And we're also buddy reading The Mothers, which is a literary fiction. I read The Vanishing Half by this author several months ago, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, or 4.5 stars. I loved it. And this is her debut, and I really want to read it. And we're also reading The Calculating Stars, which is a sci-fi novel that I don't really know anything about, but I've been meaning to read for a very long time. I hear it has amazing friendship groups. And then in the other Discord server, we will be buddy reading Ultraviolet, which again, I don't know very much about. And when you read the description, it pretty much doesn't tell you anything. So those are 4 books that I will absolutely be reading next month. They may be the only 4 books that I read next month because that's a lot of pages between those 4 books. But anyway, on to the books that I read in August. Voiceover Merphy here to give you the stats. I read 8 books this month and 3 short stories of those books. These are the ratings that I gave them. And then merging all the books and the short stories together, these are all the genres that they fall under. The first book I finished was a memoir, and that was The Beauty in Breaking. This follows a woman who was a doctor for her entire life, and is probably still a doctor. She was fairly young when she wrote this. Anyway, she starts out as an ER doctor and then goes through a lot of different places. And it's kind of her story, her experiences, her many accounts of what it was like, what it has been like for her. I don't know how to recommend this, and I really don't know how to rate it because it was so individual. It was so personal to her. It was completely her story. There were a lot of accounts that she told that were so difficult to read. There were some accounts that she told that I had to skim over because I can't handle reading such graphic depictions of infants being brought into the ER and what happens to them. But it wasn't just that kind of stuff. She talked about how frequent doctors are assaulted and how those things don't usually get reported and how they kind of deal with it internally. The strain put on doctors, the stuff that they have to think about and go through, and it was just a really raw look into her experiences as a doctor, and it was very interesting, and it all came together in the end, kind of her taking these accounts and showing what she's learned from them and how they've shaped her and how she's changed and grown, and it was a very personal accounting of her life, and it was very interesting to read, but I also don't exactly know how to rate it or discuss it. I guess if you are interested in learning more about the ins and outs of her experience, or probably doctors' experiences at large, then go for it. I definitely came out of it thinking this is not a career I would ever want to pursue. And I mean, I'm glad I read it because I learned a lot, but I also don't know how to recommend it to people, so if that sounds interesting to you, go for it. The next book I finished this month was The 13th Tale. I still don't know what genre this would fall under. Okay, I just looked it up and it says gothic fiction and suspense. It also has it under thriller, which feels very wrong. Maybe literary fiction would fit this. Let's see what the publishers put it under. Historical fiction, gothic fiction, and contemporary literature. There you go. That's the genre of the 13th tale. So this is about a woman who is, her father runs a bookshop. She's in love with books. She has a lot of personal stuff going on. And then this author who is very mysterious and doesn't give away much about herself has decided that she wants this author to interview her and write her biography. So it's a recounting, Evelyn Hugo-esque, but totally different from Evelyn Hugo. It's a recounting of this woman's story, and we're kind of back and forth in her story and in present time what's going on. And it's a mixture of how her story played out, as well as the personal things that are going on with the interviewer, and I don't know how to describe it beyond that. It was a very unique story. It was a very, very slow, atmospheric book, and it did not go anywhere near where I thought it was gonna go. It was very much its own thing. If you think you know, based off of that description, what's gonna happen, you're wrong. And it was very, very interesting. I really enjoyed it. It was different from most things that I read, but it took me for a journey. It took me for a ride, and I really enjoyed the experience of reading it, and I was very surprised at where we ended up, but also very, very, very satisfied. Next on the list is Sufficiently Advanced Magic. This is an adult fantasy, but I had it in a recent video where I talked about a good transition book if you are mostly reading YA fantasy and you want to get into an adult, because it's kind of more in between the two genres. This is about a boy who his brother, okay, so there's this tower, and in the tower, the rooms are ever changing and shifting, and within the rooms you have different obstacles, different riddles, different creatures that you have to face off against. And the goal of this whole thing is to get to the top of the tower, and when you get to the top of the tower, you can ask the goddess for a blessing of sorts, or something. And his brother went into this tower 5 years ago and never came out. And so now our main character is going into the tower, and his goal is to get to the top so that he can inquire about his brother, find out if he's still alive, and if so, how can I get to him? What can I do to help him? And this first book is his journey trying to do that. It was incredibly fast-paced, really action-packed and interesting, a complex yet easy to wrap your head around magic system. It was just fun. It was a fun book. I think the author said there are going to be 6 books total, and I think the first 2 books are the only ones out. So I'm not in a rush to continue the series, but I will, because I really enjoyed the first book, and it was a great... I guess it was just really different from the type of fantasy that I usually read, so it was a great fast-paced fantasy that kind of just felt like such an easy, fun read. Next book I finished was The Criers War, which is the book that we read over on my public server, Discord, and this is a book that had such a rough start to it. It was chapters of info dumping without any sort of character development or interesting plot starting first. It was just, here's a lot of information I want you to know about the world, but I'm not going to do it in an interesting way. It's just all the stuff I want you to know first, and then we'll start the story later, which is just the worst way to start your book. And because of that, the majority of the people in the buddy read dropped out of the buddy read before the story even really began, which I super don't blame them for. But it ended up being a pretty interesting book to me. It does have flaws, and this is a book that has really mixed feelings. A lot of people love it and a lot of people hate it, and I really get that because it does have very distinct flaws to it. It's not the best written book, and a lot of the plot points that happen, a lot of the tropes that are played with are pretty widely used, so it's not the most original feeling book, but there are some really original elements to it, and I guess I just really got captured by what was unique about it. It was a book that I kind of had to turn off my critical reading brain, which I usually don't do very well, but I was able to do with this book, and I don't know, it felt nostalgic to a lot of books that I used to read back in the day and used to love, and I haven't read anything like that recently because now the fantasies that I read are not so romance-centric and are much more high epic it's just different. It's a different type of fantasy. And I don't know, I just kind of fell into step with it and ended up having a good time with it. I don't know how to rate it because I have such mixed feelings, but I guess I don't know how to I don't know how to recommend this either because this isn't the type of book that I normally fall for, but I did. I guess if I did a video recently talking about books that don't fit into my taste, but I end up liking them anyway, and I think that this would fit. Okay, the next book I finished was A Sleeper in the Spindle, and oh my goodness, I loved this. It's not really a book, it's more like a short story, but it's a fairy tale retelling. This'll work. It's illustrated. I don't know if you can see. I gave better pictures of it in my reading vlog. It's illustrated. It's a retelling, a very unique retelling of Snow White, as well as Sleeping Beauty, but Snow White is the focus. But it's neither princess is anything like you think you know them as. Snow White, this is after her story that you and I know is over, and now she's getting ready for her wedding. But then as this happens, she hears about this kingdom where there's a princess in a tower that has gone into a deep sleep. And because of that, her entire kingdom has gone into a deep sleep. Obviously, that's Aurora. So Snow White decides to take 3 of her dwarfs, and they go on a journey to find this princess and potentially set her free. And it is creepy and very, very different and so empowering. It didn't do anything I thought it was gonna do. It was so interesting, but also that ending. I'm very, very, very happy with this book. I highly recommend it. It's so short. I think, let me see how many pages. 66 pages, and a lot of those pages are fully illustrated. So such a fast read. Such a wonderful, it really got me, man. Easy 5 stars. Easily going to be a book I talk about too often on my channel. I mean, Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors of all time, so I'm not surprised, but his writing is beautiful and different and odd, and his stories pack such a punch, and this has got to be one of my favorites of his that I've read so far. I really, really recommend it. Then I finished The Fires of Heaven, which I already have a spoiler-free review for, linked in the cards and in the description. I highly recommend this if you enjoyed The Rage of Dragons. This is the sequel to The Rage of Dragons. If you enjoyed this, you're likely going to enjoy this. I think that it took all the things that this did well, and it maintained it while also branching off and being really different from it. It's really good. It won't be out until November. I got an ARC, which was just very unexpected, but also wonderful. But I do highly, highly recommend it. The link to the first book, as well as the pre-order to this book, will be in the description. I am loving this series so far. I'll also link the spoiler-free review for the first book if you want to learn more about the series. But basically, it is a military fantasy about a guy on a revenge plot. Both of those things don't appeal to me at all, but I tell you, it did them so well, and I loved these books so much. The next book I finished was The Neverending Story, and I'm disappointed to say that I didn't love this book as much as so many people do. I know a lot of people grew up either reading the book or watching the movie, or both. I didn't have that experience. This is my first time reading the book. I still haven't watched the movie. And I thought that the first half of the book was very whimsical and not really my thing, but I still was able to enjoy it quite a bit because it was that classic children's tale, and it did a great job at it. It explored some really interesting themes, and the storytelling style was very captivating. A lot of the different creatures that we're introduced to are so much fun to hang out with. It just also did a lot of stuff that isn't personally my thing. I just don't tend to connect with books that are episodic. And I know that classic kids' stories are episodic with a purpose. They do it so that, parents can read one chapter a night to the kids and it can feel complete, but yet there's an overarching. So I get it. I just don't really enjoy reading it for some reason. I don't like that structure for me. Also, talking animals, not my thing. But it did so many things that I did genuinely enjoy. The first half of the book was kind of one of those things where it was like, it's not for me, but I get it and I'm able to enjoy it despite it not being my type of story. But then the second half happened. I did not like the second half of this book nearly as much. The main character became a little bit more difficult for me to enjoy following. The story really felt like it was dragging on, and I felt like the book was a lot longer than I really needed it to be. I will keep it because I do want to read this to my son. I think that he could potentially like it, but for me, it didn't work like I wanted it to. The last two books that I'm going to finish this month, I haven't finished at the point of recording this. So future Merphy, we'll see you in a second. Future Merphy here popping in because I forgot to mention that I read 2 Lovecraft short stories this month. I'll put the names of the short stories on the screen. I'm fairly new to Lovecraft's work and I'm really enjoying starting to explore it. He's a very, very environmental author, really takes his time to build up the creepy factor and to feel fully immersed in it. And I love that feeling. I think that adds so much to a horror, especially something as short as his stories are. So I loved that, and also just in general his stories and the execution and how they all end. They're short stories, it's kind of hard to talk about them spoiler free, but I really, really enjoyed both of them and will definitely be continuing to read them. The next book that I finished this month was Timeline by Michael Crichton. Still struggling with that name, but I got it right this time. It's Crichton. Timeline is a time travel science fiction. It's about this group of people who majored in history. Their professor has been lost to another timeline, to another point in history, and they're gonna go back and try to get him. They end up in medieval times, and it's chaos. I really love Crichton's books. I love his writing style because he really takes his time to build up the story to create a very firm foundation. I also love it because time travel is a hit or miss for me. I don't tend to like time travel in books or stories in general because time travel doesn't make sense to me. And when people talk about time travel in fiction, it's usually just like, it exists. Time travel is something that's happening now because we said so. And that just doesn't work for me. I need it to make sense to really be immersed in it. And this is something that Michael Crichton really accomplished. You can tell by his introduction in the book that time travel is something that he truly believes could happen. Sorry for the noises next to me. My son's in here. And the way he wrote this, it felt like I was simultaneously reading fiction and discussing a theory with someone who truly believes it. He explained time travel in a way that I could actually theorize with him. I could actually discuss it in the book with him, and I loved that. So it had a really firm foundation and one that was enough for me to run alongside the characters. The experience of it was it's a very slow beginning, but once we get into it, it's very fast-paced, and my goodness, things are happening on every single page. And it was different. It was different from what I expected, and I explained that more in my reading vlog. It was very I guess I was expecting something more epic based on how it was built up, and it ended up being a really fun time, and I still loved it. I mean, I did love this book. It was just kind of a different experience than I really thought I was getting into. I think that this would be adapted so well to film. I've heard that the movie is terrible, so I hope they redo it eventually. And maybe I'll actually watch it. But it was a slow beginning, and once we got into it, it was such a fast-paced ride. It was an adventure, and I really, really had a good time reading it. The next book I finished was On Writing and On World Building. Tim is a good friend of mine, so I'm biased, but also this book was fantastic. I co-narrated this audiobook with another narrator, so I took the On Writing and she took the On World Building sections, and he asked me to record this audiobook right as I was getting back into writing, so recording the On Writing section was perfect for me. I really enjoyed this book as a whole. I think that it's great, great, great writing advice. So if you haven't heard of it, if you haven't read it, if you are a writer, highly recommend. Hi, hello, third Merphy of the video, coming to you from a cell phone in my niece's bedroom. But the last book that I finished this month was Space Between Us. This is a sci-fi story. It's about a boy who has a skin condition that kind of alienates him in amongst his peers and makes people think that he's weird. And then he also has these visions that made him be diagnosed with schizophrenia. He's on medication for it. And basically this is a first contact story, and the really interesting thing about it, the really unique thing about it, is that he is the first contact. The thing that made him so different, the thing that made him so unique, is the fact that he isn't from Earth. I tend to really like these stories because I was born with a really rare disease. I was very sick as a kid, and I had a lot of self-worth issues because of it, and I love stories about teens that have these medical conditions, and the thing that makes them unique is actually some sort of fantastical element in the world, because I know that teenage Merphy would have really, really been swept away in that back when I was struggling with my self-image. Anyway, this was a really cool premise. It was a really cool twist on the first contact sci-fi structure story. I did have some issues with it. Primarily, the beginning was really, really long. A lot of day-to-day stuff that really could have been trimmed down, so it took a long time for the story to really get going. And then once it did, it was a really cool story and a really unique take on this thing. But the author clearly had a message he wanted to tell through this book, and he discussed a lot of different social issues, which I think is really fun to have parallels and real-life parallels in the book and see how they connect. In this instance, it was a lot more heavy-handed than I tend to enjoy. I usually like a lot more nuance with this sort of thing, and with this book it was like stop the book so that characters can have a long monologue explaining how the social issues parallel to what's happening with this alien situation. And I regularly felt pulled out of the story because I felt like the author was speaking directly to me instead of feeling like I was reading a story and finding interesting parallels. But by the end of the book, I didn't really feel like I came away thinking, wow, I have a lot to think about. Instead, I came away thinking I was just told what to think. And yeah, I just like more nuance than that when an author tries to bring real life scenarios into the story like that. So I think that it was a really unique story. I really, really liked the fiction side of it. I really liked the story side of it. I think that it was a great take on a fairly standard story, and I really, really liked that. But some of the execution issues ended up making me just constantly be pulled out of the story. So my final book of the month was Space Between Us, and it was generally a really good read. Now, on to the ad.
Here you go, darling. I made you a sandwich.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want a little bit of advice?
No, I don't.
Okay, but if you did want advice...
I don't. I really don't.
Sure, but if you did, I would just say that maybe you could cook it a little bit less. Well, it's burnt. You gave me 2 knives. If you're tired of unsolicited advice, I have some more for you. Your website sucks, but it could be better with Squarespace. Squarespace has powerful blogging tools to share your posts, photos, videos, and updates. Categorize, share, and schedule your posts to make your content work for you. They also have integrated analytics, so you can refine your email strategy with real-time campaign and website analytics from one source. Learn what content leads to higher engagement, tracking metrics from send to sale. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the link in my description for 10% off your first website or domain. Don't let your website suck. Use Squarespace. So these are the books that I read this month. Be sure to chat with me more about them in the comments if you've read them, if you plan to read any of them. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon.